Welcome back to Beyond the Gate, our Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Meg.
And today we are covering episode 40, Dwarf in the Flask.
Yes. Summary for this episode. Long ago, the blood of a simple slave was used in an experiment, which created a strange, shapeless being. In exchange for the gift of existence, the being gave the slave a name and cursed him with immortality.
Yes, and this covers manga chapter 74, The Dwarf in the Flask, chapter 75, The Last Days of Celxus, which is the mistranslation of Xerxes in the manga. I don't know what happened there. Oh well.
Yeah. This is going to be, I feel like we have a lot to discuss this episode, so let's just get right into it. So we're at Fort Briggs, and basically, like, all the central forces that are there, like, think Olivier is responsible for Raven's death. And it's kind of, one thing that I noted in the manga was that Buccaneer, like, makes Olivier seem suspicious, because he says, like, the last time I saw Raven, he was with Major General Armstrong alone.
Yeah, I think her men might have done that because she didn't want them to be implicated in any way. She said, let me take full responsibility. And it's also useful for them because if they're not connected, they can't suspect the rebellion or the coup that they were staging.
Yes. That was my thinking exactly. Anyway, Olivier has been sent to Central, and she meets Mustang while she's there, and she is, like, immediately rude to him. I think in the manga, at least, she's like, what are you, greenhorn? What?
Greenhorn? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she calls him a greenhorn, like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I think I was sent here for my, special skills. And she's not buying it. And Mustang asks Olivier to dinner, and it's kind of funny because she's like, I hope you're prepared to foot the bill because I'm going to
eat you into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
That'll be my line when my if I go on a date, that'll be my line.
Yeah, and then he, like, rescinds his invitation. He's like, maybe not right now.
And she calls him a coward.
Yep, and a cheapskate.
Yes.
But then,
isn't he younger than her and he just made a pass at her like that?
Yeah, he totally did. But then he says there are many fine florists in Central, and he wants to give her some flowers, which is totally like a hint from earlier episodes when we saw
a contact.
Yes. So Olivier meets with the Fuhrer, and he just, like, comes right out and, like, what did you do to Raven? And she does not deny it. She's like, there's no point. So she basically says that he was too talkative and told her all about the immortal army and the Fuhrer's identity. And so she killed him because he was not a great ally.
Loose lips sink ships.
Yes. And she asked for his seat at the Fuhrer's table, I guess you could say. And he gives it to her in exchange for Central taking over Briggs. But then we see, as Megan mentioned, that Olivier's soldiers are still very much loyal to her.
Yep, you can't keep her down. Like, the Fuhrer may have given her that position a little too easily, but it's kind of like that saying goes where you have to keep your friends close but your enemies closer. And having her there means he gets to put whoever he wants in charge of Briggs. But little does he know that the Briggs soldiers are, like, fiercely loyal to Olivier specifically and not just to their country.
Yeah. I love that when a leader can inspire such loyalty, but that also can be a bad thing too.
True. But in this case,
it's a good
stick
thing.
Together through thick and thin, but they're also willing to make hard sacrifices.
Anyway, Mustang and Hawkeye, they are reunited briefly. We haven't seen them. I guess we saw them talking on the phone. Maybe last episode before, but they weren't together. Now they're together. They're eating in the mess hall, and they're, like, just chatting about their jobs, and Hawkeye gets a dig in there. She says that the Fuhrer is not a slacker like Mustang. In parentheses.
And
Uh,
also in the manga, Roy tries to lay on the charm, and they may be eating lunch together in the mess hall, but he invites her out to like a real dinner at a restaurant, and she turns him down, and he just says, 0 for 2 today. And she asks him what he means, and he admits that he asked Olivier out, and she turned him down too.
And while they're talking, Hawkeye like looks on the ground and like you can like tell that she is thinking about or like senses that like Pride could be listening in. And so they begin speaking in code. They're doing like, well, you can
Yeah.
explain.
Okay. Well, first thing I'm gonna say is you can listen to their whole conversation in the manga, or I mean read their whole conversation in the manga. They only get partway through in the anime, but I know they had to cut it for time. But basically what happens is Riza taps her mug twice on the table, indicating that she has a message to tell Roy, and he taps his pen twice on the table in response to indicate he's ready to receive the message. So while they're talking, every time Riza says a name, Roy remembers it. And later, she taps her mug again to indicate the message is over. So Roy, which I can't believe he remembered all these names, or maybe he was writing them down as they were talking, he goes into a bathroom stall and he writes down all of the names Riza said. And in order, he takes the first letter of each of those names to spell out a secret message.
Mm-hmm. And what is the secret message?
Celine Bradley is a homunculus.
Yes. So now Mustang knows. And then he burns up the message with his
Yeah, he could have just flushed it without burning it.
come on. We know this man is
Yeah, but somebody in
kind
the
of
next
dramatic.
stall could have been like, dude, are you smoking in here? You can't smoke in the bathroom.
It's fine. I would have done the same thing. And then we see a brief scene of father sleeping in his chair. That man does nothing. But then it kind of like fades into a younger version of him cleaning. And there's this black thing in a flask that starts talking to him while he's cleaning. And he asks him his name and he says he's slave number 23. I don't know, this whole scene's kind of funny because like he's very much not surprised. He's like, oh, this thing's talking to me. Okay, whatever. And he only gets mad, I think, when it calls him dumb.
Yep.
And then the thing in the flask tells him that the blood that he gave his master, which you can see he has like a bandage on his arm, created him. And he decides to give the slave a name. And at first he tries to give him, okay, I think,
Theophrastus bombastus something. So like we covered this in a previous episode of our podcast, but like there was a famous alchemist by the name of like Theophrastus bombastus von Hohenheim or something, and that's where the author got the Hohenheim name from. So when the
yes.
creature starts rattling off this name, the slave is like, whoa, 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 whoa. I can't remember that. That is way too long. I don't like that name. So then he just calls him von Hohenheim. And that's
Yes.
where he got his name from.
Yes. So it's not father. It's actually Hohenheim
Hohenheim.
that we see. And the thing in the flask asks him if he wants freedom, or actually first he asks him if he knows how to read and write, and Hohenheim's like no, and he doesn't really care to learn. But then the thing in the flask is like, well, if you don't learn, how are you gonna get your freedom?
Yeah, you'll never be able to rise past where you are.
Yes, yeah. I thought it was interesting what he said. I saved it. He said, knowledge is the greatest treasure. It will help you succeed in life without ever weighing you down. I thought that was a very interesting thing because I don't exactly agree with that. Like,
knowledge can weigh you down.
yeah,
In
like
a mental sense.
think about what Ed now know about how Philosopher's Stone is made.
Mm.
I mean, it's good that they know it, but that,
knowledge is power, but it's also responsibility, and it can be heavy to carry that alone. But I get the sentiment, and it reminds me of
Yeah,
something. It
totally.
reminds me of something my grandma would tell me, and she was referring to music though. Like when she would hear me sing, she would say like, "Keep it up because no one can take that away from you." And
Mm-hmm.
there's something, like physically, yes, my voice could be taken from me, or I could lose the ability to sing somehow, but I would always have the music in either my mind or my heart or my memory, so
Mm-hmm.
the sentiment is what really matters in those cases.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. We'll discuss it later, but later on. But I think that just this thing, the words that it says are important because it shapes. You can see the way it thinks, and
Yes.
um. Anyway, we'll discuss later on, I guess.
Yeah.
Um. And so this thing in the flask, he decides to teach Hohenheim how to read and write, and Hohenheim asks what this thing's name is, and he says, "You can call me the Dwarf in the Flask, or the Homunculus." So then we see like a montage of the Dwarf in the Flask and Hohenheim's master teaching him not just to read and write, but also like alchemy. And the final thing that he learns is all is one and one is all, which is
Yep.
what Ed and Al learned when they were on the island.
Yes. And in the manga, Hohenheim actually ends up teaching the other slaves things like reading and writing, and he gets caught doing it by his master, um, who is actually kind of impressed that Hohenheim can do that. And Hohenheim gets a little, well, he remembers the dwarf in the flask's words, like, do you want to rise above your station kind of thing. And he decides to ask his master to be hired as an assistant because he knows a little bit of alchemy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And obviously his master agrees. He must have seen something in him.
Yeah.
Um, and after all this, the Dwarf and the Flask and Hohenheim are talking about their dreams. And Hohenheim wants to like have a family and basically build a life. And I love what the Dwarf and the Flask says. He says, "Too bad you have to form communities and breed to survive."
And Hohenheim's just like, don't call it that.
But Hohenheim says like community is why we live and it's what makes us happy. And Dwarf in the Flask says he would be happy if he was free from his flask.
Because he cannot leave it, otherwise he will die. He cannot survive outside of it. And there's this really funny spoof comic panel the mangaka wrote, we'll have to post it, where
Mm-hmm.
he's telling Hohenheim this. He's like, so no butterfingers. And Hohenheim's like, yeah, whatever. Oh, crap. And drops the flask. It shatters. And then Homunculus, you just see like a little halo and angel wings, and it's like floating to heaven. And the last panel is him explaining to Ed and Al in the present. He's like, so I found something to replace it with. It was orange and it had these adorable little fins. And Ed just shrieks, a goldfish! This whole story wouldn't have happened if he had killed the homunculus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll definitely post that because I was
That was pretty good.
that was probably the one that has made me the extra comic that has made me laugh the most so far.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then we see the Dwarf in the Flask goes before the King of Xerxes. In the manga, we see that like the king asks to see him, but he offers to make him immortal. And in the manga, at least, the Dwarf in the Flask says, "Why does like the king wants to be immortal?" And he's like, "Why does everyone who acquires power and wealth go in that direction?"
Exactly.
I guess I was thinking about that. Is like maybe they think it's like the next step. Like I have all the power, I have all the money. Now I
Yeah.
want to be able
Because you're
to
not going to be
use
able to have
that.
it forever.
Yeah, now I want to be able to use that forever. Anyway, so the Dwarf in the Flask says he can help him do that. So we see people of Xerxes digging irrigation canals. I don't know, did they ever say it was Xerxes? I feel like they did at some
Yeah.
point.
Just towns around Xerxes, like
Yeah.
encompassing the whole of the country. They are claiming to dig these irrigation canals, and the people are all like, "Oh, the king is so kind, and we're gonna be able
Mhm.
to water our crops." But it's all a front.
Yeah, because it's obviously a transmutation circle.
Yep.
Um, and then we see like them going around and like slaughtering different villages, and then we see the transmutation circle that Ed saw when he was in Xerxes, or like he saw part of it.
Oh, the ruins, yep,
Um,
on the
yeah,
wall.
yeah, we see that transmutation circle, and we see like different spots light up as the different villages get totally slaughtered, which is super awesome. Um,
It's awesome foresight on the mangaka's part.
yes, no,
As
that it's not awesome. Yes, awesome foresight, very sad,
yeah.
in reality. And finally, everything is ready. We can see that at least in the manga, you can tell that the king has aged. Honestly, I don't think he looked that different in anime, but you can
No.
tell that Hohenheim has definitely aged. We see him like he looks like the Hohenheim that we know.
Yeah,
Um,
and his voice changes.
yep, yes. And then the transmutation starts, and like all these hands like come up from the circle, and we see like everyone die inside the circle except Hohenheim and Dwarf and the Flask. And he says that they are at the center of the circle, so they're not being hurt by the transmutation. And the Dwarf and the Flask explains that he used Hohenheim's blood to open the door of truth. And then we see the eye open, and then like the Dwarf and the Flask and Hohenheim like disintegrate into the portal of truth. Which we already know what happens inside the portal of
Oh
truth.
yeah.
Or the door of truth. I don't know. Um,
And Hohenheim didn't have to give anything for the portal
yeah.
because the people died for this
Yes.
sacrifice. So it's different from the human transmutation
Mm-hmm.
portal.
Yes. And I was also thinking like all those hands, were those supposed to be like the souls? Like I
Sure.
because they came up like not just like in the circle, but like all over the country. So
It might just be part of the transmutation. I'm not sure if those are souls or if that's just
yeah,
like a representation of what's happening to the people.
I
Yeah.
wasn't sure what that was. But anyway, those are the hands that we do see inside of the inside truth, like when Ed goes in.
Yeah,
Like
what pulls
those
them
hands like
inside.
grab him and like pulls him through the door. Yeah. So Hohenheim, he wakes up and everyone is dead
The
in
entire
Xerxes.
country.
Yes, which we already know, but now we see what happened, how everyone was slaughtered in one night. And while he's like totally freaking out, we see this person. There's one other survivor. They start talking to him, and he's in the shadows, and he like comes out, and we see that it's a mirror image of Hohenheim. And the dwarf in the flask has become father. He exchanged all the souls of Xerxes for immortality, not just for himself, but also for Hohenheim.
Yes, half for him, half for Hohenheim. They're both immortals now. And in the manga, I found it interesting. The father says, "Now I can finally walk with my own 2 feet." And I thought,
Hmm.
oh, that's like harkening back to Ed's like, get up and walk. You've got 2 feet, use them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ooh, I like that. All right. And then the final scene of the episode, Hohenheim in the present, he's on the train and he meets Izumi and Sig.
Yes,
And
he may have met them before. In the manga, Azumi says, "Do you remember me?" And I think I remember in previous chapters her telling Ed and Al about meeting a mysterious alchemist named Hohenheim on her travels,
yeah,
and
I
they
think
admit that that's their dad.
you're right. But in the anime, she makes it sound like
She
they
knows of
haven't
him, but
yeah, they
they
haven't
haven't
actually
met.
met. Yeah. So they're talking with him, and then Izumi gets sick, and Hohenheim sends Sig for the car, and Hohenheim asks Izumi if she has seen the truth. And she gives her backstory, and then he sticks her hand
He
inside
like
of his stomach, inside of her stomach.
yeah, I don't know how he does that. He just like
I'm confused by that,
it's
but
not like he turns his hand into a blade or anything. He just
mm-mm.
shoves his fingers up and it goes through her flesh.
Yeah, and then like when he takes it out, there's like no wound, so
He must have
kind
some
of
like phasing ability.
yeah. And of course, Sig punches him. Um, but then Izumi's like, it's easier for me to breathe, and we learn that he has rearranged her insides.
Yeah,
Um,
she lost some organs during her human transmutation. If I
mhm.
had to guess, it would be the reproductive organs.
Yes, that's
But yeah, that makes sense given what she lost. But like, I mean, he rearranged the necessary organs she has left because obviously, if you lost important organs in your body, everything's going to be shifted around all weird. So he helped her and like basically perform surgery on her to make her life easier.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think I'm pretty sure it's her reproductive organ because even in the manga, she's like,
I can't have another
I lost
sword.
the ability to have children. So,
Yeah.
uh, and then Izumi's like, "What are you?" And Hohenheim is like, "I'm a philosopher's stone in the form of a man."
And I can almost hear Ed screaming, "Are you freaking kidding me?"
Yes, I think Ed would be very mad to learn that.
We've been looking for that for ages, and then we found out it was something horrible, and now you're saying our dad is it.
Yep. Yep. And that's the end of the episode.
Yes. All right, get excited because it's voice actor notes time. Actually,
Perfect.
before we get to the main one, a brief note about the Dwarf and the Flask. So, in case you're confused, he and Father are played by Kent Williams, who is also the narrator. But a, that is a different voice actor than Hohenheim. So we've already covered both of them in separate episodes. The person we really wanted to cover in this episode was who plays the young von Hohenheim, or Slave 23, and that would be Aaron Dismuke. We mentioned him in one of the first episodes because he was the original Alphonse from the 2003 FMA. He was a child actor, so he was also Hiro Soma in the original Fruits Basket and young Akito. But he has stuck with voice acting for like his whole life, which we are grateful for because we think he does an amazing job. And if you can't tell, we're huge fans. So
Mhm.
we have quite a long list of voice acting notes. So he is Senku Ishigami from Dr. Stone, Marx Francois from Black Clover, Tamaki Yamajiki from My Hero Academia, Kakeru Manabe from Fruits Basket. He also is additional voices in Attack on Titan, but we also need to mention he works on writing sometimes, so script adaptation. After the script is originally translated, script adapters usually change it around to make it flow a little better for the context of the story and what the voice actors need to say. And he like single-handedly saved one of the best Attack on Titan lines.
Mhm.
So if you want the story, you can look up a voice actor panel of his because he talks about it a lot. But basically, the translation the writers came
It's
up with was one way, and he fixed it to be the correct way.
yes, basically, if you watch any of Attack on Titan, Erwin's speech,
Ervin.
yeah.
Yeah. So, on the very off chance that you ever hear this, Aaron, you're awesome. Thank you. If you ever want to be on the podcast, let us know.
I don't think I would be able to handle that.
Maybe a bit starstruck.
Yes.
Yep, but moving on from that, that was like the most exciting thing. For animation expertise, first, I love Hohenheim's design in the manga. Arakawa does a stellar job of drawing him as he grows up and becomes an alchemist. Because when he's a slave, he's pretty young. I would peg him at like late teens, early 20s, I guess. And he looks very underfed and scrawny and bony. And as he kind of levels up, becomes an alchemist and an assistant, he gains some weight and looks healthier. and then it follows him all the way until he looks like the Hohenheim we know. But she really does a good job of like the different stages of life he goes through. And then back to the anime, there's a great shot where Slave 23 and the dwarf are talking. It's shot outside of the window and it pans around to show both of them. So that's like a 3D environment that the camera swiveled around in to show both of them talking. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah. All right.
And story elements, backstory time. It's kind of our reminder that people and things aren't always as they seem. So now we know who now we know who and what Ed and Al's dad really is, and maybe he's not so bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was the episode where I was like, oh, this classic father figure that's, the dad who walks out and is just the worst. Maybe that's not the case here.
Before this episode, I kind of had a feeling they were gonna do something else with this character, and this one just confirmed it. Like, I think
there was definitely when you see like father look exactly like him, you're like, oh, okay, there's definitely more to this.
And when you see that father just ruined his life, you're like, okay, Hohenheim has to be a good guy because father is the worst and totally destroyed his country. So of course Hohenheim wouldn't align himself with father.
Yes. And then there's some extra stuff now that we finally have learned the backstory of the Homunculus and Hohenheim. We just have a few extra things we want to talk about. First, the very first intro, we actually see the young Hohenheim. I remember the first time me and Megan watched Full Metal, like I definitely just assumed that guy in the first intro was Ed grown up.
Yeah. Or like Ed with his hair slicked back without bangs or something.
Yeah. But nope, it's Hohenheim. Just a young Hohenheim. Also, I love the attention to detail that the author has because, and now you notice have like these golden eyes that nobody else has in Amestris. But then we see their dad, who is from Xerxes. He's got golden eyes.
And everyone in Xerxes has the same complexion.
Yes. And so they're like, it's so cool because they're like the remaining, like, they're like the only survivors.
They're the legacy of that country.
Yeah.
And it's cool because, like, Ishvalans have red eyes. That's how you tell they're Ishvalan. That Ed and Al are, what do we say, Xerxan? I don't know. Xerxian. But yeah, like they didn't take after their mother in terms of looks, so they both got their dad's hair and eyes. So they can maybe pass it on to their kids to keep the memory of a lost civilization going.
Yeah. It's very cool. And then finally, something that we noticed that the dwarf was born with Hohenheim's blood. So does that mean that he is related to Ed and Al?
Actually, in the manga,
like,
there was
a
sly comment made. The dwarf was like, "You gave me the blood so I can exist, so it's like you're my father." And Hohenheim's like, "Wow, I don't have a family yet, and already I'm a father." And so I think later on in the manga there might be. I saw like a spoof comic one time where it was like the homunculi coming to Ed and Al and being like, "Come on, uncles, cough up some dough for us."
Yes. Yeah. So that's just a weird thought, but we definitely have more thoughts on the Dwarf and the Flask and like him as like the villain of the story and like his conception and all that, but we will save that for another episode.
Because there will be more time to discuss it.
Yes, yeah. Actually, one other thing that I read in the manga that I wanted to mention, that the Dwarf and the Flask, he said he was made purely by accident. So that was
an experiment gone right or wrong, however you
that was interesting. But we will talk more about that and share our opinions later.
Yeah.
We definitely have some thoughts. All right. So favorite line of the episode, we have the same one for this episode. So Megan, you wanna?
Yes. It was a line from Hohenheim. That's where humans find happiness. We live for the bonds that we form with friends and family members. That's who we humans are.
Mm.
And we both liked it because we agreed with that.
Yeah, we agree with that. And it's kind of funny because I think Ed and Al agree with that as well.
Hmm.
And I think it's something that they also have learned throughout this journey as they like make more friends and become closer with, Winry, the family that they already have. Um,
Yeah. I mean, they could have learned that from their dad, they could have learned that from their mom, or they could have discovered it all on their own just through
mhm.
living.
Yeah. All right. And then what did we learn in this episode?
We learned that you shouldn't just settle for less in life, but make sure that your aspirations don't get away from you. Because Hohenheim, he was ready to just settle in and live his life as a slave, but realized that he wanted more. But he didn't notice the warning signs as everyone around him wanted more and wanted immortality, wanted the impossible, and were willing
Mhm.
to make sacrifices to get it.
Yes. And then who pushed the story forward?
Hohenheim, his blood brought the homunculus to life, and Father slash Dwarf in the Flask started this whole mess. So, the both of them.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's all we have for this episode. And
Mhm.
we'll be back next week with another episode.
Okay, thanks for listening.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.